Just people who can't get credit with kosher turf accountants. And people who do not like paying tax.
And to me, one of the most important things that a government can deliver is long-term economic security and stability.
On a building site in Surrey, David Cameron discusses with engineers exactly where Ian Duncan Smith is going to have his accident. And we start with the biggest stories of the week. Ian and Henning, take a look at this.
Yes, that's Panama. Someone handing over money.
Want some more? He does.
Putin. Oh, that smells fishy. And already there are investigations in a lot of countries. A prime minister's fallen. Might be two. This is a fabulous story by a whistleblower for a company in Panama, and I do hope he's somewhere with a beard and a baseball cap, hidden safely away, having offended Putin, the Chinese, all Arab countries, and David Cameron, obviously. It's 11 million documents proving that the idea that the rich are an extraordinary elite who are constantly trying to evade giving any money to any society with which they live in is entirely true. What do you think?
Well, it's not unexpected, is it? So, you didn't look at that and think, oh, I would have never guessed that. So, on the other end, does keep Britain safe, in a way. Because for as long as the president of Bananistan has got his ill-gotten money squirreled away in UK property, they're not going to attack the UK. So essentially, you don't need MI5, MI6 and anything. All you need is Foxtons.
It's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened on this scale. I mean, I'm sorry to be enthusiastic about it. I know you expected it, but, God, the detail's fantastic. And they've had a scalp. I mean, most journalism doesn't end up with the Prime Minister resigning. But in Iceland, I mean, was it 10% of the population went out on the street? That'd be the equivalent of 5 million of us going up to Downing Street and saying, give us your dad's money back. It's just an idea.
And as you said, the people of Iceland have reacted with fury. On the streets of Reykjavik, the incredibly well-behaved Icelanders stamped their feet for a bit and their Prime Minister resigned after it was revealed he and his wife had a huge offshore tax fund. Although his spokesman claims he has not resigned, he has merely vacated the office of Prime Minister temporarily.
Oh, no, we've heard this before, Suzanne. Anyway, what's the man in Iceland called?
Sven?
I get a German on and he does the racist stereotypes.
Yes, these are the Panama Papers from the office of tax lawyers Mossack Fonseca. I believe Harry Redknapp once tried to sign him for Tottenham. Why is this embarrassing for the Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister's father was named in the papers, and he ran a investment vehicle, amusingly called Blair Moore Investments. Which is entertaining, because it suggests you could move even more money offshore than Blair did.
And the fund was moved to Ireland when Cameron became Prime Minister, because apparently a source said it was about to come under more scrutiny. I would like to make it clear at this point that nobody has broken the law.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about Jack the Ripper?
Yeah, well...
This is the Prime Minister who said, I want more transparency and I want less corruption. And there are these very funny series of statements, starting with, this is a private matter, and people saying, no, it isn't. OK, it's not private. I've never, in the future, going to get any money from these offshore holdings. And then people say, what about in the past, then? And then I believe the latest news is he's admitted there was 30 grand he's taken out of it, and he sold the shares.
Yeah.
So he used to own some shares in Blair Moore.
Yeah, he suddenly remembered.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it does give the impression that, you know, the shares paid for his inheritance and his schooling, and it's just that idea that we're all in it together, if you happen to run a country.
And then at some point during that, he said, put up or shut up, which was kind of like a big red flag flying, I think, because when a politician says that, you know their back's against the wall.
Have you noticed that with other politicians? Well, I think it is incredibly embarrassing for him.
Yes, Cameron dealt with these embarrassing questions in instalments. He said it's a private matter. Here he is in 2013 commenting on the private tax affairs of Jimmy Carr.
Think of all those people who work hard, who pay their taxes, and out of that post-tax income save up to go and see Jimmy Carr. He's taking that money and stuffing it into something where he doesn't have to pay taxes. That is not fair.
To be fair, whenever Cameron gives a speech, he's always free entry.
Where was he when he was asked about his tax affairs, and why was it extra embarrassing?
The Bahamas?
Shame, he would have got a nice tan, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
No.
Lanzarote?
No.
Well, PricewaterhouseCoopers, wasn't he?
That's right, yes. He was at the accountants PricewaterhouseCoopers, who have been criticised by a Commons committee for facilitating tax avoidance on an industrial scale. Various world leaders have been building up stacks of tax-free cash offshore. What has the president of the UAE been secretly doing with all his money?
I bought up London properties.
Exactly right, yeah. He's bought £1.2 billion worth of London properties. He's bought half of Oxford Street and parts of Mayfair. He didn't get the utilities or the stations, though, which are actually better value. Astonishingly, the world of football has allowed itself to be besmirched by these offshore revelations. How did that happen?
Well, they got their new man Infantino as the new FIFA president, and then they had one geezer looking after the ethics committee or something, and then it required, and he was working, if not for that Fonseca lot, but then something related to them. So essentially, he's the ethics man, and he's right in the middle of it all. So, and that doesn't look too good, does it? They should have kept Blatter, I said that all along.
Yeah. Yes, UEFA did a deal on TV rights with an offshore company called Cross Trading. It's like the night manager, this, isn't it? Which was a front for an alleged fraudster. The deal was signed by brand new, squeaky clean FIFA boss Gianni Infantino. Is the shock news that some of the world's biggest bastards have been using offshore companies to dodge their tax? Panama may seem an unlikely location for financial security, but if there's one thing we know about Panama, they can keep things under their hat.
I don't think we should applaud that sort of thing.
No. It's disgusting. Yeah. In the past, David Cameron has described people using offshore schemes to minimise their tax as not morally acceptable. A refreshingly honest end to the eulogy at his father's funeral. The first casualty of the scandal was Iceland's Prime Minister, who has been forced to resign. He's also in danger of having his assets frozen. Still, that's what happens if you go sunbathing in Reykjavik. Ronnie Corbett, that one's for you. Vladimir Putin has been linked to the offshore banking scandal. Rather more surprisingly, he's also been linked to Wendy Deng. At the moment, it's just a rumour. We'll only know for sure when they split up and she's found dead in a locked hotel room.
Labour keeps up the pressure on David Cameron over his investments and his father's offshore fund. Labour is keeping up the pressure on David Cameron after he revealed he has profited from his father's offshore investment fund. The Prime Minister and Downing Street have between them issued 4 statements this week on Mr Cameron's links with his father's firm, Blairmore Holdings, before he finally clarified last night that he'd held shares until 2010. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is demanding the Prime Minister make a statement to Parliament about all his financial dealings. Our political correspondent Carol Walker reports.
David Cameron has admitted it's been a difficult few days. He said he has nothing to hide, but he's facing accusations from Labour that he misled the public about his personal involvement in his late father's offshore fund and demands that he makes a statement to Parliament.
There is a matter of trust. You need to be able to trust your Prime Minister, and the fact that he couldn't answer a straight question straightforwardly, straight away, I think has undermined the trust that we have in him.
I think David Cameron's got big questions to answer. I mean, it seems as if this information has had to be dragged out of him over the past few days. You know, what he said just a few days ago appeared to suggest that there was no benefit that he had ever derived from offshore funds like this one.
At first, Downing Street was reluctant to say anything about the details in the Panama Papers of the offshore fund run by the Prime Minister's father. On Monday, they said it was a private matter, but on Tuesday, he said this.
I have no shares, no offshore trusts, no offshore funds, nothing like that. And so that, I think, is a very clear description.
On Wednesday came a further statement saying there are no offshore funds or trusts which the Prime Minister, Mrs Cameron or their children will benefit from in the future. Then last night he admitted he had owned the shares.
Samantha and I had a joint account and we owned 5,000 units in Blairmore Investment Trust, which we sold in January 2010. That was worth something like £30,000. How are you? Good to see you.
The offshore fund known as Blairmore Holdings was founded in Panama by David Cameron's late father, Ian. The Prime Minister has said it was not set up to avoid paying tax in the UK and that when he sold his shares, he paid all the tax due. His admission that he had shares in the business has seized the headlines, but there's no suggestion Mr Cameron has done anything illegal, and Tory MPs have defended his handling of the row.
It is a natural human instinct when the media are piling in on your father's reputation and record, and your father is dead and can't defend himself. When he knew that he'd paid all of the tax that he had to pay, it is, I think, natural to feel, well, I want to protect my father, I want to protect my family.
David Cameron did not declare the Blairmore shares in the Register of Members' Interests, which lists MPs outside financial affairs. The rules did not require him to do so.
David Cameron has said he'll publish his tax returns soon to be clear and open about his financial affairs. That will put the pressure on other senior ministers to do so as well. But for Number 10, this row has provided an unwelcome reminder of the Prime Minister's wealthy and privileged background and a distraction from their bigger political battles.
David Cameron will come under further pressure when Parliament returns on Monday over his personal finances and whether he's prepared to do more to ensure the wealthy pay their fair share of tax. Carol Walker, BBC News, Westminster.
With me now is our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed. Kamal, it's been a very tough week for Mr Cameron. And where do you place it in the context of this massive data leak about financial dealings that's come from Panama?
Absolutely fair. And I mean, it has been very difficult politically for David Cameron. We've seen the headlines, Carol there, talking about some of the issues around trust in the Prime Minister. Is he consistent in what he tells the public, the reminders of his wealth? But in terms of what has been revealed in the Panama Papers, this huge dump of millions of documents about how the wealthy move money secretly around the world, I think many in the public might judge that to be Mr Cameron to be at the lower end of what has been revealed. We've had the billionaires buying up property in London. We've had the FIFA president linked to 2 men accused of bribery. We've had the Chinese Politburo members who've been linked to offshore funds, a circle supposedly around President Putin of Russia. We've had the Icelandic Prime Minister who has resigned after it was revealed that he had links to a fund which also involved his wife. I think the big issue that has been raised this whole week, from David Cameron to China to Russia to FIFA, whoever it's been, is this issue of us and them. That somehow in the world there are few rules, there are different rules for the elites, the wealthy, the politicians, the rich businessmen, that are different from the rules for me and you, the ordinary people. And I think that has led to this toxic relationship. It really has touched a nerve that really has been raw since 2008 and the financial crisis. And that nerve is still rather raw. And I think that is what will be the big outcome of the Panama Papers, is that that nerve is still being touched and still irritates the public hugely.
An unprecedented move by the Prime Minister as he attempts to shut down the row over his finances. He's publishing his tax returns as he says he's to blame for mishandling questions about his financial affairs.
Don't blame number 10 Downing Street or nameless advisors, blame me, and I will learn the lessons.
So what will he reveal, and will it draw a line under the issue? Hello, a very good evening to you. In an unprecedented move, the Prime Minister is preparing to publish his tax returns. It comes after he admitted he could have handled the recent row about his financial affairs better, and his admission earlier in the week that he had invested in an offshore trust set up by his late father. Well, speaking to Conservative activists, he said he should take the blame for the way in which the news was dealt with. Our political correspondent Carol Walker reports.
Demonstrators gathered to leave the Prime Minister in no doubt about the strength of feeling amongst some people on the whole issue of tax. They were out to attack his government for a tax system they say is unfair. The Prime Minister said he'd been very angry about what some had said about his late father, who'd founded an offshore fund. But he said that should not have clouded the picture.
Well, it's not been a great week. I know that I should have handled this better. I could have handled this better. I know there are lessons to learn, and I will learn them. And don't blame number 10 Downing Street or nameless advisors, blame me.
David Cameron's promised to learn lessons from his handling of this row, to be open and transparent in future, to publish his tax returns. But Labour say this matter raises questions about his personal integrity.
Most Tories seem to be rallying round their leader, but the London Mayor Boris Johnson chose not to lend his support as he left the conference.
Is it morally wrong to avoid tax by investing in an offshore trust or fund? Do you think that is morally wrong?
Come on. Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
It took David Cameron several days to admit that he and his wife did have shares in his late father's offshore fund, which they sold for £30,000 before he became Prime Minister. He said he'd paid all the tax due and there's no suggestion he's done anything illegal. But the Labour leader has accused Mr Cameron of misleading people and losing public trust.
It's not about an individual, it's not about one person, it's not about one family, it's about a whole ethos where the very rich are able to put their money into tax havens, to offshore accounts, where there is often a zero rate of income tax, sometimes also a zero rate of corporation tax.
The Prime Minister insists he has acted to address the concerns of protesters like these, closing tax loopholes and ensuring greater international transparency on tax. He'll be hoping that by releasing unprecedented detail on his personal finances, that he can convince the public he has nothing to hide.
Well, Carol joins us now from Downing Street. What can we expect to learn then from the publication of these returns?
Well, what we're getting tonight is going to be the details of all the Prime Minister's earnings and tax going back 6 years since just before he became Prime Minister. That will include, of course, his salary, the tax and allowances on that, the money he gets from renting out his house in West London while he lives here in Downing Street, the inheritance he got after his father died, and the money he got from selling off all the stocks and shares just before he became Prime Minister, including, of course, those shares in his late father's offshore fund. Now, Downing Street know that this is going to bring yet more focus on the Prime Minister's personal finances, yet more headlines on all of this, but they've clearly judged that the only way that they're going to be able to put this behind them is by confronting the issue head-on with this unprecedented level of detail. Labour are in no mood to let this drop. They're calling for a public inquiry. They're saying that Jeremy Corbyn will publish his own tax returns. And I think that both sides are now gearing up for another phase in this whole row when Parliament comes back on Monday.
OK, Carol, thank you. David Cameron faces calls to release more information about his finances. The Prime Minister's published a summary of 6 years' worth of tax returns in the wake of the Panama Papers, but the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he should go further.
I want to see the papers. We need to know what he's actually returned as a tax return. We need to know why he put this money overseas in the first place.
With Parliament returning tomorrow, we'll be exploring how far the pressure for more openness will go. Good evening. David Cameron is facing calls from Labour to release further information about his financial affairs after his tax returns were published in the wake of the Panama Papers. Mr Cameron became the first Prime Minister to make such a move. He was followed by the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who's joined other Scottish party leaders in publishing her tax returns. As our political correspondent Carol Walker reports, there is now pressure for more transparency from politicians and others in public life.
David Cameron has admitted it's not been a great week, under relentless pressure over his financial affairs. Now he's given us more detail on his income and taxes than any previous Prime Minister. With some demonstrating their anger at his handling of the affair, he's published his accountant's summary of his finances going back 6 years. Last year, his income was just over £200,000. 140,000 of that was his salary as Prime Minister. He received nearly £47,000 from renting out his London home. We already knew he'd sold shares in the Blairmore offshore fund set up by his late father for £30,000 before he became Prime Minister. But the documents show he also sold other shares worth £72,000 at the time, and there are no details on this. The Labour leader said there were more unanswered questions.
I want to see the papers. We need to know what he's actually returned as a tax return. We need to know why he put this money overseas in the first place and whether he made anything out of it or not before 2010 when he became Prime Minister. These are questions that he must answer.
The Prime Minister has, as you say, now taken an unprecedented step of more disclosure. I think the people who definitely need to do this are the Prime Minister, as he's done, and the Leader of the Opposition. I know Jeremy Corbyn has said he's going to do it. I don't think he's done it yet.
We already knew David Cameron had received £300,000 from his father's will after he died in 2010. Now it's emerged his mother gave him a further £200,000. Downing Street said this was to share the inheritance more fairly between him and his brother, and strongly denied the suggestion it was done to avoid paying inheritance tax. One financial expert agreed.
This is tax planning. That's where the state encourages you to behave in a certain way and you follow it and you get a tax benefit. ISAs, pensions, inheritance tax planning are planning, not avoidance, and we need to be very careful how we treat this.
This afternoon, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon published her latest tax return. Scotland's other political leaders have already done so. It shows her only income is her salary of almost £105,000.
It's for every politician to make their own decision, but I think certainly those who lead parties, First Minister, Prime Minister, I think there is a good argument that we should do that, and I certainly am happy to make that commitment.
Now there is pressure for other senior ministers to publish details of their finances too, and for the government to do more to ensure the wealthy pay their fair share of tax.
Well, let's join Carol now, who's outside Downing Street. We've had days of debate along these lines. Carol, where do you think this issue goes next?
Well, Michelle, we do now know that the Prime Minister will be making a statement in the Commons tomorrow, and Downing Street will undoubtedly be hoping that, having put out that unprecedented amount of information, he will be able to get onto the front foot to talk about what the government is doing to investigate some of the serious allegations about tax abuse and to crack down on some of the tax loopholes which still exist. Downing Street always knew that however much information they put out, there would always be demands for more, and we've seen some of that today. But there is now a bigger political and public debate about whether the tax system is fair, when you have a system whereby the wealthy have options available for them to reduce their tax, which are not necessarily open to those at the other end of the scale. And now that David Cameron's personal wealth is out there for all to see, emblazoned across all the newspapers, he will also come under pressure to demonstrate that he is ready to address those much wider questions.
Dennis Skinner. Does the Prime Minister recall that at the time after he became Prime Minister under the coalition, and at the time when he was dividing the nation between strivers and scroungers, I asked him a very important question about the windfall he received when he wrote off the mortgage of the premises in Notting Hill, and I said to him he didn't write off the mortgage of the one the taxpayers were helping to pay for at Oxford. I didn't receive a proper answer then. Maybe Dodgy Dave will answer it now. And by the way,
Order. I must ask the honourable gentleman, order. Don't require any assistance from some junior minister. An absurd proposition. I invite the honourable gentleman to withdraw that adjective that he used a moment ago. He's perfectly capable of asking his question without using that word. It is up to him, but if he doesn't wish to withdraw it, I can't reasonably ask the Prime Minister to answer the question. All he has to do is withdraw that word and think of another. Sorry? I think he knows the word beginning with D and ending in Y that he inappropriately used.
Davy.
Withdraw.
I know what you're talking about.
Very simple. Withdraw.
This man has done more to divide this nation than anybody else. He's looked after his own pocket. I still refer to him as Dodgy Dave. Do what you like.
Order. I'm sorry. I must ask the honourable gentleman to withdraw the word. Very well. Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, I order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House for the remainder of this day's sitting.
He's used to this.
Very well. Needless to say, no reply is required to that.